Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I want to introduce you to really quite a impressive young lady. Dana Mock is her name. She is now is it an adjunct professor, an assistant professor?
I'm an associate professor
An
with Lang School
associate
of
professor
Business.
at the Lang School of Business at the University of Guelph. And she was an associate professor of real estate finance and economics at Western University. And she's recently written really quite an interesting article about real estate and what's going on. And I think it's an issue that a lot of us have paid a lot of attention to. Dana, she says that her research interests are broadly defined in the realm of real estate and urban economics with a focus on housing and urban development. And most of her research studies have been applied empirical studies of urban phenomena drawn from existing theories, and she often adopts a spatial lens to study her research questions. So, we've talked, Diana, on our show to politicians, to developers. Now it's going to be really interesting to talk to an academic about what's going on. So tell me, if you could, what was the thesis, the argument in this article that you published recently and obviously was pretty influential?
It is, we welcome the policy initiatives and the announcement from the government trying to tackle affordability issues in Canada. But then what's being done and suggested, it's not enough. We are heading to the right direction, but not enough.
And so what do you like, and what do you think we need to do more of?
What I like is the following analogy in the sense that in the past, some of the discussions and policies addressing housing policies was like throwing spaghetti at the wall and see which one sticks. But then in the announcement in the couple of weeks preceding to today, most of the pledges and the policy initiatives were more like dart players trying to aim at the bullseye. So it has a direction, it has more focus, but then there are a lot more that we can do as Canadians.
Now, are you speaking about the federal government or the provincial government?
Well, in the sense that the announcement were coming from the federal government, but the policies were now finally addressing and trying to commit all levels of government to sing a consistent, a same tune about affordability and not just about money.
One of the big issues that some people have pointed out in the recent federal government announcement is that they're almost using money as a bribe, where they're holding back money if cities don't do certain things, and providing money if cities do certain things. And some people have questioned, is that democracy? If cities want to go a different way, and they're elected by their local, people, should they be forced to do certain things by the federal government? And, one example is this, as of right to do a fourplex out of all single family homes. What do you think? Is it right for the federal government to use sort of this bribe of money, whether you do what they want or not?
Indeed, the announcement in the last few weeks are strings attached. So these are not just funds lay on the table and say, let the market dictate and see, or even the cities decide what to do with the money. But the problem with housing is a very interesting sector of the economy. If leaving the free market unfettered, let the market decide on what's being provided to the society, this is exactly what we are seeing, that the housing units, no matter in the owner-occupied housing sector or in the rental sector, prices and rents are just not adjusting to a level that is affordable to most Canadians. And for that reason, these policies, which are strings attached, telling the directives for the municipalities and governments and also developers what to do and what direction that they should take, I think it's heading to the right direction, at least to gear the housing sector and the government at all levels to go towards the same direction.
So Stats Canada did a study a little while ago with, I think, the assistance of CMHC, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, that said that the time period to get approvals in Toronto, Vancouver, Victoria were the longest in the Western world. And they compared, numerous different approvals, and Europe is far faster. But even, comparing Canada and the United States and Australia, they found out that Toronto was the longest, and Vancouver, actually, Victoria was the longest, Vancouver second longest, Toronto just behind it. And they suggested that the time period to get approval, the risk of getting approval, the red tape and regulations that one had to go through, those were the biggest issues. Do you agree? What do
And
you think of that?
well, indeed, if you think about construction, without the bureaucratic red tape, without all these processes, it could take very fast within a year to be constructed. But taking into account of all these processes, it could take up to about 2 to sometimes 3 years. And that's creating the time lag in supply in response to the demand. And part of the argument by most of the affordable housing units advocates was that, you know what, one way to streamline supply, not just to increase supply, to make it, but instead to make it more responsive to market changes, is to cut these bureaucratic red tape and make it faster.
Yeah, and frankly, most of the people I talk to would be ecstatic if it was 2 to 3 years, like you just said. Most people think it's 5 to 7 years, and the
Wow.
approval time period is astronomically long and risky, where you just don't know what's going to get approved, particularly when often it gets turned down by city councils, and you got to go into this quasi judicial process of the Ontario Land Tribunal. Anyway, we got to take a break for some messages. We're going to be back with Diana Mock, an associate professor at the University of Guelph at the Laird School of Business at the University of Guelph, in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone. Back into talking about housing with a really smart academic. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Our topic tonight is housing, which is, as you know, if you've been following my show, we've chatted about a lot, but we haven't had on the show a really smart academic. We've had developers, we've had planners, we've had politicians, we've had people that are interested in cities, but to have someone that actually studies this from a research standpoint and teaches it, I think is really unique and special. Diana Mock is our guest. She is an associate professor in real estate and real estate finance at the Laird School of Business at the University of Guelph. She used to be you were in the Department of Geography, I think, at the University of Western Ontario. What was your thesis on? That's interesting that we've got such a smart person talking about housing. Out of interest, what was your thesis on?
Oh, well, in relation to housing, my first, let's, rather than talking about thesis, but big picture about my interest in housing, my first study of housing was actually my master's thesis, and then leading up to the PhD thesis. So master's thesis was actually dead on, same topic, but it was back then in mid 1990s, talking about in the 1980s, the federal and provincial government completely withdrawing housing subsidies to the rental sector, and what could be the implications for affordable housing in Ontario beyond 2025. And in fact, that was exactly, we were with my thesis supervisor back then at Queen's, was talking about exactly the same thing, leaving the market unfettered. We are likely to see households doubling up, seeing a housing crisis, including homelessness. So that was my
Really? So
master's
did you
thesis.
predict what's happened?
That was a computer simulation together with some econometric analysis that we do so long time ago, so I forgot the exact number, but we are predicting that will be homelessness. And unless people are really doubling up, we are not going to see affordable housing at all. So that was
Well, that's interesting because numerous
30
people have
years ago.
suggested that the federal government withdraw from social housing has really created some of the crisis that we have today. Let me sort of take you sort of back to academics and basic economics, if I could. Some people have gone through a whole bunch of other items as being issues of what's created the housing, not social housing or homelessness, but general lack of affordability in the marketplace, and have said it's because of immigration or foreign buyers or Airbnbs or a whole bunch of other issues. And other people have said no, it's just supply and demand. That supply is far less than demand, and it's because we're building as many houses today as we were building in the 1970s, and our population is 2.5 times the size. What do you think? Is it just as easy as supply and demand, and we're not building enough? Or is it more complicated and a lot of these other factors need to be taken into account?
When it comes to economics, it's always supply and demand. And then what other factors would influence supply and demand? But I think people forget that about the housing market. One fun fact or or I should say, how the market operates. It's that it is not just like supplying one single identical item, but it's about supplying what types of items in the market. The thing about affordability is if supply is constantly being introduced, or new supply being constantly introduced to the market at a particular price level or quality level, then you would have to rely on older units that with the passage of time that gets older and then not as well maintained to pass down to a price level that otherwise people would be able to afford at a lower price level. But then looking at the capital gains and the investment side of housing, people are not just letting house just less well maintained and then sell it at a lower price, but everyone was just trying to upgrade, renovate to tap into the capital gain of selling at a higher price. And for that reason, the units are just not trickling down to a different price level, but instead they just keep skyrocketing upward. And for that reason, it's not just about supply. One big number. We need 3.5 million units by 2030 to be affordable. But what these units are and at what price level?
So the way that we've seemed to have accomplished that lower price is by building smaller and smaller condos. And, the condo size has gone from like an average of 700 square feet to like under 500 square feet. Is that a bad solution?
It's not good or bad, but it's a variety of different types of units, like multiplexes, like duplexes, that are more than just single detached housing at a particular, let's say, average 1 million house in Toronto at that level. But it's to open up the opportunities to potential homeowners to look at alternatives. But then the other thing is supply and demand. Behind the scene is the capital flow, and also how the mortgage financing can be obtained by Canadians, whether that mortgage would be affordable to households as well. So what I'm seeing is just in relation to what we discussed earlier about the policy initiatives, is what we have been doing is not enough. So far, we have been just talking about supply. What are the units? What are the strings attached to these pledges, and how provinces and cities can commit, but we can also think about the household side. What are some of the more creative mortgage instruments that we can create? What are the alternative type of home ownership, not just the traditional sense, can we creatively introduce to the market? So I think we can think in more creative ways to allow Canadians to own or rent.
Well, I'd be interested in your ideas in that regard, because really what happened over the course of the last, prior to the pandemic, 5 or 10 years was low interest rates, almost historically low interest rates. They didn't actually aid affordability, because what they did is they bid up prices. And so therefore, the benefit of the low interest rates really weren't felt by people, because all they ended up doing is using that money to buy ever more expensive houses. So it was counter beneficial. So what are some of your ideas on what we should be doing? Some people have talked about reverse amortization, which is happening in the marketplace today. I don't think that makes sense. Other people have been talking about extending amortization to like 40 years, which would be more similar in the United States versus the 20 to 25 that you get in Canada. What ideas that you have that you think would help?
Let me give a little caveat before I say what I have. This is me putting a hat like a wild social scientist, trying to dream of something that we might not be familiar with. How about some ideas like when we think about corporate finance, for example, talking to some of my colleagues across the hallway, we always talk about shares, share prices, and tossing it in the stock market. How come housing doesn't have something like this for home ownership? We have to buy the whole house. Can we not have something like housing shares? Now, this is a wild idea, but what I'm trying to say is, I think as academics and anyone trying to think about our housing problem, it's not just thinking within the existing markets that we have. What are the mortgages that we have? But instead think wild and creative, and let the politicians and policymakers think about the reality, how to bring it to the society. But dream about, what about dividing the share of housing? and then be able to trade shares as an investment so that even without occupying in the unit, we are able to enjoy the capital gain as a way of saving towards buying a house eventually.
Well, I think that's an interesting idea. But connected to sort of the market flexibility and attention and transparency. One of the issues one of the issues people have raised is this issue of blind bidding. And so let me explain to our listeners, and you probably know this far better than I, but in the stock market, you know what a price is on a minute by minute, second by second basis, and you can decide whether you want to buy or sell. The problem with buying of homes is we have these restrictions about informing people what the last bid is. And so therefore you're blind bidding. And some people have suggested that blind bidding has created a scenario where everyone dramatically overbids. And that's led to this overbidding where, houses are sold for 100, 200,000 over asking. And if you really want to get that house, particularly in a constrained supply marketplace, you end up, by definition, creating this massive acceleration in pricing. Do you think if we made the stock market house buying more like the stock market and allowed people to know what the last bid was, that it would assist in transparency and price discovery, or would it actually lead to more bubbles and valleys?
In the first place, let me step back a little bit. There's one little complaint, not so much complaint, but my awareness about housing market as opposed to, let's say, going to the supermarket buying groceries. You can compare prices easily in the sense that housing market is not as transparent, which is something academics like to say this is not an efficient market for allowing information to flow. So for a shares market, for example, to be able to be implemented in the first place, number one, we need to rethink about housing market. What are the inefficiencies? How can we improve on the flow of information among buyers and sellers, or even for lenders and borrowers in general? And so the prerequisite for a housing shares market to be able to exist is, number one, think about what else we can do to improve on the transparency of the housing market.
What else could we do?
I'm going to toss out something a little controversial, but I haven't really, it's not a research topic that I have studied deep enough yet. It's perhaps think about an open platform. We have something similar, but not enough. An open platform to allow buyers and sellers to meet directly instead of having a middle person that would charge a commission. And that would centralize information, allow people to know what's going on much more quickly, directly, rather than through any intermediaries.
Well, that's interesting. There's been a big litigation in the United States recently that you're probably very well aware of, where they suggested that the commission structure was almost price fixing, and they broke down that to real estate price commission. And some people are thinking that the price commissions that 5-6% are going to end up being 2-3%. One of the arguments they made was that unlike almost any other industry, and you think about travel agents or stock brokers or a whole bunch of other different industries there where technology and competition has broken away the previous established compensation structure, it hasn't happened in real estate. Now, some people are duplicating that litigation in Canada. I heard an interview with the class action lawsuit lawyers that are leading that charge. They think, well, this might come to court in like 3 or 4 years, so it's going to be a long time before it ever has an impact. But 97% of all homes that are sold on MLS. The multiple listing services, and so we do get a reasonable amount of knowledge of homes that are for sale. The problem is all we get is asking price. We don't get price information. And how do you do price discovery when all you get? And then people talk about what I do is what do they call it, a bully offer, so that you come in and you offer way over. initially to try to get the person to not go through the whole process. And then other people put in a low asking price so that they incentivize. So there's all these strategies that real estate agents and vendors use that almost seems to want to, ruin and take advantage of the lack of information and price discovery that you'd have in a regular market.
Totally agree. I don't have to talk about, all the price wars and all the strategies in the last 10 years in housing market, but even just think about data, MLS data. It takes a long time and actually a lawsuit to get the MLS listing data public for us to be able to see what houses are available on the market. Now, but transacted price is still a very closed information that unless you work with a realtor, it's very hard to actually find the last transacted price of a similar house in the market. Totally agree. Even thinking about data, forget about buying strategy and then all the negotiation going on between selling and buying agents. This is totally inefficient.
So, Professor Mack, Dr. Mack, you, is it Mock? I apologize, not Mack, Mock.
That's right.
You said that this federal government announcement was good, but not nearly enough. If you were the Minister of Housing, what would you do?
Ah, I wish I knew the answer. Open up the real estate market in the first place by providing a lot more information, a centralized depository of information for buyers and sellers and renters and landlords. This is one thing. Number two, probably would allow, in some way, it's the policy direction going this way as well. It's to allow existing homeowners a lot more independent decision in, let's say, 4 units as of right type of decision, or open up or providing financial incentives for homeowners to let out walkout basement. Think about that. That would immediately dramatically increase existing supply rather than relying on constructing new units. So I will be accepting even more creative solutions, working with lending institutions as well, allowing, thinking about alternative type of mortgage financing, allowing more potential new homeowners to tap into the capital gain so that they can use the capital gain in housing market to save on buying the next home.
So it's really getting rid of some regulation and making it more of a free market. Is that what you're saying?
More transparent, yes. It's more directing the market to more open, efficient, and transparent.
It's interesting. I went to the University of Western Ontario Business School. I went to business school in the United States. I've been in numerous different industries: the pharmaceutical business, the beer business, the entertainment business, the hotel business, the hockey business, and the real estate development business. The real estate development business has always had this reputation of being sort of a swashbuckling free enterprise kind of business where developers, go buy land and build stuff. But I have found there's more government interference and regulation and red tape in the real estate development business than in almost any other business I've been involved with, other than the pharmaceutical business, where I think you develop drugs, you really have a responsibility to get them tested and approved by Health Canada or FDA. And I've really questioned whether that regulation and red tape makes any sense at all. And so often it changes. You talk about basement apartments. In the last generation, there were a whole bunch of regulations that restricted basement apartments and made it more difficult. And now we're talking about the missing middle being a big problem, and we want basement apartments. We want quadplexes. We've had in the past regulations where you had to have a minimum number of parking stalls per unit. Now we're talking about a maximum number of parking stalls per unit, where before we wanted to ensure that you had parking and room for cars, and now we want to restrict the space for cars so that you're forcing people to use transit. Does government get too involved in the real estate development business?
The funny thing is, thinking about real estate in particular, about housing, it is everywhere. Just to give you an example, and I don't want to sidetrack too much, earlier on there was an announcement of the new policy about setting a quota for international students study permits in Canada. This initially, if you think about it, it's more like an education policy. But then, because it ties to student housing and housing market in general, it becomes something that interfere with the housing market and housing policies. So the fun thing about housing is everyone needs a shelter. This is basic right. And for that reason, any policies affecting housing or real estate has a lot to do with labor market outcome, has to do with education, has to do with transportation. So it's almost everywhere that we can think about. So sometimes, and that's why some of these policies intended for one purpose, for example, student visa, would have unnecessary and sometimes unwelcome consequence in the housing sector. Just to give you an example, when I was writing the article earlier on for the Globe, is I was thinking about, you know what, with these policies, we are having a big picture about housing. But then where is the land? Forget about the money, but where about the land? Where is it going to be built? If we are going to have more duplexes, more mixed use, or more condos, where that piece of land is going to come from? It is unlikely, for example, to be in highly densely populated city center where the demand would be mostly be located, and let alone where people will be traveling to in terms of the work. So in other words, these new funds and pledges and new construction and supply are more likely to be located in more suburban areas. This is just my pure guess. In other words, housing policies intended to do something good for the housing market, increasing the supply, it's going to affect transportation. Where are the people? How are they going to commute to work? Where will be the employment center? So on and so forth. Yes, if you ask me whether housing government are too hands-on, too many policies, too restrictive in real estate and housing, maybe, but sometimes unintentional.
I really agree. And I think that, your comments about infrastructure and the need to make sure that we'll have got transit and water and sewage and all those other things are critically important. And that's what governments can do to positively impact housing and housing development and supply. But I also really wonder about your comment about, you said everyone needs a house and it's a human right. Regrettably, it's not. We don't think about the right to housing comparable to the way we think about the right to an education or to healthcare. And maybe we should, because I think, going back to your master's thesis, if we actually had a lot more housing, I think we'd have a lot less homelessness. We'd have a lot less mental health issues. I think we'd have a lot less drug usage. I think we'd have a lot lower use of emergency rooms, etc. And I went to this one presentation where a homelessness expert said that it costs $100,000 a year to provide someone with a house. It costs $1 million a year to not provide them with a house. And I don't know whether that number was right or wrong, but they used an extrapolation of how many emergency room visits, how many police visits, mental health excesses, crime, etc., and added it up and said it would be far cheaper to actually build some housing and give people an as of right for a house. Dana Mock, Associate Professor at the Laird School of Business at the University of Guelph, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
I'm going to take a break and come back with some of my own comments on what I think we need to do with the housing crisis in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone. And Diana Mock, thank you so much for joining us. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.